Here we go. This is the mixing demo for the color wheel. So I have my primary colors out, my white as well, and then also my solvent-free gel. We'll need that. I'm mixing with my palette knife, and then I also have a couple of paper towels at the ready as well. So we're going to start by putting out our primary colors. So our primaries are yellow. We're using cadmium yellow light for our primary yellow. Our red, our primary red, is actually going to be a combination of our two reds that are in our kits. So our cadmium red, which is a very warm red, and then our alizarin crimson, which is a very cool red. So we're going to combine those together to make a primary red. And then our ultramarine blue is what we'll be using as our primary blue. We also are going to put a little bit of white on our palette, and we'll be using that a little bit for this project. So let's begin. We're going to try to mix as strategically as possible. So we're going to have our primaries up here. We're going to mix a row of our secondary colors and then a row of the intermediate or the tertiary colors. So let's begin by putting out a big pile of cadmium yellow. Okay. And now I will put this off to the side. I'm going to do some cadmium red. And this is cadmium red light, which also is a very warm version of a cadmium red, so it goes very much towards orange, which is also why we want to be adding some alizarin crimson, our cool red, into this cadmium. Okay, so I'm going to put out a bit of this alizarin crimson as well. The alizarin crimson is quite strong as a color, so I don't need to put a ton of that out on the palette. Okay, and then ultramarine blue is going to be right here. Okay, and like I said, we're taking a strategic approach in this color mixing. So we're going to have our primaries up at the top. We're going to be mixing our secondaries from here, and then down at the bottom of the palette will be our tertiary and intermediate colors. We're always kind of thinking of how these colors relate to one another. Okay, and I'm going to put some white at the bottom of my palette. Don't need a ton of white. And then I'm also going to put some solvent-free gel for when I begin to put the paint onto my canvas. Need to make it a little bit more fluid, so I'm going to be pulling that out as well. Okay, let's begin by mixing our primary red. So I'm just going to mix these two bits of paint together. Now I'm mixing quite a bit, but I'm going to be mixing a lot of colors today to be going on the color wheel. And I'd rather mix a little bit more than having to try to remix individual colors later. So don't put tiny, tiny, tiny little bits of paint out on your palette. You might be engineering a situation for yourself where you just have to end up remixing a bunch of your colors, and that can be fairly difficult. So the way that we're trying to mix today is sort of like how we were mixing with our value scales, where we're taking a strategic approach to the mixing. We're not trying to mix all the grays individually from black and white, right? We're using these kind of middle grays and then adding a little bit more black or a little bit more white to adjust it. So we're going to be mixing our secondary colors, so those are combinations of the primaries, and then we'll use those secondaries, the secondary color, to also mix out the intermediate colors. So we're not going to try to just mix everything straight from the primaries, because that can be a lot more work. Okay, so now I have mixed a red that is kind of in between the cadmium red light that we have and the alizarin crimson. So it's not too warm and it's not too cool. It's more of just a primary red. Okay, so there is our red to work with. So my colors are arranged going from light to dark, so yellow being the lightest, red is kind of in the middle, blue is going to be the darkest of the primaries. And now I'm going to start by mixing the secondaries kind of in between, and I'll mix my green over here. Okay, so let's start in between the yellow and red, which is going to make orange. So, and before I go into my piles of paint, I'm always wiping off my palette knife so I don't contaminate that pile of paint. So I'm going to try to mix, let's take a big bit of yellow there, and then some red, and we'll start right there. So I'm trying to mix an orange that feels like it's right in between the yellow and the red. And then I'll also be mixing a yellow orange as one of the intermediates and a red orange as one of the intermediates. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So as you're mixing your secondaries, you're kind of asking yourself, does this feel like it's right in between these two colors? If at first with this secondary it's feeling like it's maybe a little too yellow, then you add a little bit more red into it and you kind of balance it out. Okay, so there, this is actually a pretty nice orange. I don't think I really have to adjust it. So I'm actually going to scrape this up a little bit, move it up over here, and I'm also really pressing my palette knife down through the paint, scraping it back up, pressing it back down just to make sure there's no clumps of yellow or clumps of red that haven't mixed in that will come up as I'm painting. That can be a real bummer if you feel like you've mixed out a particular color but you didn't mix it all the way and it turns out like a different color on your canvas. Okay, so that is a nice orange. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm also going to take a bit of this and put it right here. That I'm going to eventually make into a yellow orange. And I'm also going to take some more of this and put it right here. I'm still leaving myself a nice little pile for the orange part of my color wheel, but I'm making a little note right here that will eventually become a red orange. Okay? Alright, so there are my oranges. Now, let's just wipe that, put it right there. Okay, moving on. So let me wipe off my palette knife. Okay, now between red and blue, so between red and blue is going to be purple, obviously. So let's grab, now this one is a little bit more difficult because I can go very, very dark and it can be kind of hard to see what the color truly looks like. So we might then need to add a little bit of white. So red, and I'm going to start off with a smaller portion of the blue as I'm adding it into the red because the blue is quite dark, it's quite intense, and it can overwhelm the other colors that you're mixing it into. So I'm going to start off a little bit smaller and then see where it goes from here. Now, what you're going to notice as you're mixing these colors is that it's very difficult to get a intense or chromatic purple from this combination of colors. It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong, that's just the limitation of creating this traditional color wheel and of these color combinations. So that what that actually means is that you might just need to get a particular tube of paint that is a chromatic purple. You technically can mix purples, sure, from primaries, but it doesn't mean you're going to get a very chromatic purple. Okay, so as you can see, this is looking a little bit brown. So what I'm also going to do is I'm actually going to put a little bit more of my alizarin crimson on my palette for the purple. Just going to put that right there. Okay. I'm going to add a little bit more of the alizarin crimson, which is a cool red, so that can be nicer for making purples. A little bit more of that. And I'm also going to add a little bit more of this blue now, the ultramarine blue. So again, I'm striving for a color that at first is between the red and blue, and then I'm also going to be mixing intermediate purples, one that's a more red purple or red violet, and then also a blue purple or blue violet. Okay, that's feeling like it's fairly in between those colors. It's kind of going into a middle ground. Okay, so I'm going to move these purples over a little bit too. So I also can have a little bit of space over here to address my greens. Okay, so, and now what I'm also going to do, the red and blue can be so dark, especially the alizarin crimson and the blue can be so dark that it can actually be kind of hard to tell what the color is like because the value is so intensely dark. So I'm going to add a little bit of white to my purple just to see the color a little bit more clearly. Okay, a little bit more. Which, yes, will make it look a little bit more pastel-y, but I just kind of want to be able to see that purple color to it a little bit more clearly. Okay. So something like that. So now what I'm also going to do again is grab a little bit more of this, put a pile right there, and then a little bit more, and I'm going to put a pile right there. So to make my red purple, I'll be adding a little bit more of this red and this red, okay, to push it more towards the red side of the spectrum. And for the blue purple or blue violet, I'll be adding a little bit more blue. Let's also make those color notes for my orange. So let me go back over here. So on this side, it's going to be more of a yellow orange. So I'll make that little color note for myself. And then on this side, it's going to be more of a red orange. So I'm going to grab more of that red and put that right there. Okay. So now we can kind of imagine that rather than this palette just being in a line, that it wrapped around in a circle, and in that circle the yellow and blue will be coming together on this other side. So that's going to happen over here. So now what we're going to mix is what's in between blue and yellow. That's going to be green, right? Okay, so I'm actually just going to grab the rest of this yellow, and I can put more yellow out on my palette for when I need to paint in the yellow part of my color wheel. Okay, so I'll actually want more, even more yellow for mixing my green. So what you're also going to notice as you start to mix colors is that the blue, a little bit of the blue, or the darker colors usually, will go a really long way, right? But the yellow, for example, is quite light, and it can be much more overwhelmed by a dark color. So you're not just adding equal parts of each color to make a color that feels like it's in between those colors, because certain colors have more tinting strength, or they'll go farther. Okay, so wiping off my palette knife, I'm going to use my other paper towel now. That paper towel is quite saturated, so I'm going to grab a little bit of blue to start, so you can see the difference in those piles. Now let's see if we can get a green that feels like it's in between. So again, this is going to be a good lesson in what colors you can mix, just starting with primaries. And you'll see that you can mix all these different colors. They're not always going to be super intense. So the orange looks quite nice with the yellow and red. The purples though go fairly neutral, so it kind of is pushing towards brown. And the green is also, you can make a pretty nice green, but it's not super intense. It's not going to be a very chromatic, bright green. So what that kind of tells you is that you need to add some more colors to your palette to get those different greens and purples, for example. Okay, I think this green just needs a tiny bit more blue. I am really glad though that I didn't put a really big pile of the blue in there, because this really just needs a tiny bit more blue, and then it's going to feel like a nice secondary green. So that really shows you how the blue, which is quite dark, you're not adding an equal part of blue to the yellow to make this secondary green, because the blue has a much higher tinting strength than the yellow does. And you've just become more familiar with those different colors and how they work as you paint and as you are mixing out colors more and more. Okay, so that's a pretty nice secondary green. So what I'll do now is also take a pile of that green. Oop, and you can see that didn't mix all the way. So let's actually take that back over here. Okay, there we go. Let that blue integrate. Okay, so now we're going to take a pile of that, put that green right there, and make another little pile. Make sure to leave yourself some green to fill in that secondary green. Okay, and then this green, we will have this green be leaning towards the blue right here, so I'll put that little color note. And then the other side, so we're imagining this wrapping around in a circle, so this green would be close to the yellow. Okay. So even in the way that we're mixing, we're already thinking like a color wheel, just in the way that we're organizing the colors on the palette. Okay, so we're going from warm to cool. Yellow, yellow orange, orange, red, red purple, violet, blue, blue. Okay, so we're already sort of organizing things as we would on an actual color wheel. Okay, so let's start to mix these out now, and then as we're mixing these, we'll see if we need to add a little bit more of one secondary, a little bit more of one primary. We'll just see. Okay, so mixing that together, making a yellow orange. Okay, and I want to push this yellow orange even more towards yellow. So let me wipe off my palette knife, and I'm going to get more of the yellow into this. So we want the yellow orange to feel distinct from the orange. All right, I'm actually going to push it even more towards yellow. So again, wiping it off. Okay, let's try that. Okay, that looks much better. All right, so we have a nice yellow orange now. Okay, wipe that off. Now we want to do our red orange. So let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks like a nice red orange. It feels distinct from the orange, and it also feels distinct from the red. Okay, so you want these colors to, they're kind of in between colors. They should be distinct from the other colors, but when we put them all together, they'll make a nice kind of gradient on our color wheel. Okay, now these other purples, the red, violet, and blue violet, I'll probably have to add a little bit of white into them so you can see the color, because this will go quite dark. When you scrape it up as well, that can also kind of show you the color more clearly. Let's add some more red into that. So again, wiping it off before I go into the red, I'm going to grab a little bit more of this alizarin crimson and some of this red mixture that I made. So a bit more of the red in there. And let's add a little bit more white to that to see what the color is truly looking like, because it is going so dark, it's a little hard to see. Okay. Now, the purples, they will look more kind of brownish. That's just because of the colors that you're using to mix them, so don't be alarmed by that. We will learn how to mix some more chromatic purples. Even making a neutral with alizarin crimson and phthalo green, you can get a really beautiful purple out of that. And then if you really love purple, you want purple on your palette, I will have specific pigments that I will recommend for you to look into, because sometimes you just need to buy a particular pigment to get certain colors. Okay. Now we're going to do our blue violet. I'm putting a little bit more blue out. Okay. Now this is really dark because we've added more of that blue into there, which can go very dark. So let's add some white into that to see the color a little bit more clearly. Okay, and we can tell that it's going towards a blue violet. So that's nice. Okay, got our blue violet. So last little color pairing right here is going to be our greens. Okay, so first we're starting with our blue-green. So it has more of the blue in it. I'll just start with this amount of blue and then we'll see if we need more. That may already be enough. We will likely need more yellow in that one. I'm trying not to mix these colors together. Okay. Alright, so let's mix a little bit more blue in there. Again, with the blues, you want to start off with a little bit less than maybe you think you might need, just because it's so easy to overwhelm other colors using the blue. So I'm starting by adding little piles of my blue into this combination because I know it has a greater tinting strength. Okay, and that is looking like a nice blue-green, which is going to be a darker green. If I compare that to my secondary color, my secondary green that I've mixed, it is distinct from it. So that's what we're aiming for, getting these different gradations of color. All right, and lastly, I'm going to grab even more yellow and add that into the yellow-green. Okay, so, and that is looking nice. I just want to make sure I mix that all the way. So again, I'm scraping it up off of my palette, pressing it back down, flattening it out, fully mixing mixing those pigments together. All right, and that is a distinctive yellow-green. If I compare it to my other greens, I can tell that it is different and that it has more yellow in it. So as you're mixing too, you can take your palette knife, compare it to the other colors it is in relationship with. So if you can't tell if you need more yellow in it or more blue in your green, for example, start by comparing what should be your yellow green to maybe your secondary green. And can you tell that it has more yellow in it? If it's just kind of blending together when you compare them, that lets you know that you might need more yellow. Or same scenario with the blue green, comparing it to your secondary. If it's not feeling darker and bluer, then you need to add more of that blue into there. So make comparisons as you go. All right, so I've now mixed out, starting from my primaries, my secondary colors, so between yellow and red, orange, between red and blue, purple, and between blue and yellow, green. And then from there, I mixed my intermediate colors. So my yellow orange, my red orange, which are variations on my secondary. On the purple, the variations on this secondary are the red violet or red purple and the blue violet or blue purple. And then same thing with the green. So I have my green, which is my secondary, and then a blue green and a yellow green. And you can tell that I've mixed them out in these different rows to stay organized. Okay, so also check out the color wheel demo and try to keep your palettes nice and organized and to be mixing out in these lines, not just kind of all over the place. These lines make it so that you can easily compare colors to each other as you go, and you can understand their relationship to each other.